Imagine a battlefield shrouded in smoke, where two of the mightiest empires of Europe and Asia clash in a bloody war. On one side stands the powerful Ottoman Empire, ruling over territories spanning 3 continents. On the other, the Habsburg Monarchy, one of Europe's most influential powers. But in 1739, everything changed. A treaty was signed that not only ended the war, but also recognized for the first time an independent nation in the Caucasus. Do you know which treaty this was? Let's uncover this story together. The Treaty of Belgrade, also known as the Peace of Belgrade, was signed on September 18, 1739, marking the end of the Austro-Turkish War. This treaty did more than just redraw borders between empires. It brought about an unprecedented recognition. Circassia, especially Kabardia, was acknowledged as an independent nation. But what led to this war? What were the consequences of this treaty? And why is it so crucial to the history of Europe and Asia? Let's explore all of this now. The story I'm about to tell you is one of power, ambition, and the delicate balance between great empires. Did you know that before this treaty, the Ottoman Empire controlled lands from the gates of Vienna to the shores of North Africa? Or that the Habsburg Monarchy was so vast that people used to say the sun never set on Habsburg lands? These were truly titans of their age, and their conflict would reshape the map of Europe. If you love history and want to uncover the mysteries of great empires like this video, subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles and don't miss a single episode. Join us on this journey through time as we explore one of the most fascinating periods in European and Asian history. Hit that notification bell to stay updated with our latest historical adventures. The Austro-Turkish War didn't just appear out of thin air. This conflict was brewing for decades, simmering in the tension-filled cauldron of European politics. Picture this: 2 mighty empires, the Ottomans and the Habsburgs, both eyeing the same prize: control over the Balkans and the strategic Danube River. This wasn't just about land, it was about power, trade routes, and the very future of Europe. By 1737, the Habsburg monarchy had grown tired of the diplomatic dance. They saw an opportunity to expand their territory and decided to take matters into their own hands. But the Ottoman Empire, still mighty and proud, wasn't about to let their territory slip away without a fight. What followed was 2 years of brutal warfare that would drain both empires of their resources and their men. The battlefields of this war tell countless stories of courage and tragedy. Armies clashed in muddy fields and fortress sieges, while diplomats plotted in elegant palaces. The cost was staggering, not just in gold and supplies, but in human lives. Both sides threw everything they had into this conflict, hoping to emerge victorious. Here's something fascinating that most people don't know. While this war was raging, an unusual development was taking place in the Caucasus. Circassia, despite gaining recognition as an independent nation through the eventual treaty, was never actually a unified state. Think about that for a moment. A nation recognized by major European powers that didn't even have a central government. The Circassian tribes lived autonomously, often fighting among themselves just as much as they fought external enemies. This internal division would prove fatal in the long run. These tribal conflicts made it difficult for the Circassians to present a united front against foreign powers. When the Russian Empire began eyeing their territories in the 19th century, this lack of unity made them an easier target. It's a sobering reminder that sometimes the greatest threat to a nation's survival comes not from external enemies, but from internal divisions. The war dragged on through 1738, with neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. Fortunes shifted back and forth like the tides, until both empires realized that the cost of continuing might be greater than the price of peace. This realization would eventually lead them to the negotiating table in Belgrade. But that's a story for another chapter in our tale. 2 mighty empires, 2 determined leaders whose decisions would shape the destiny of nations. On one side stood the Ottoman Empire, led by Sultan Mahmud I, who ascended to power during one of the most turbulent periods in Ottoman history. Imagine this: a young prince suddenly thrust onto the throne in 1730 after his uncle Ahmed III was deposed in a violent rebellion. The Patrona Halil Revolt, as it became known, shook the very foundations of the empire, but Mahmud proved to be more resilient than his enemies expected. Despite inheriting an empire in chaos, he managed to restore stability and even strengthen Ottoman influence. Here's a fascinating detail. Mahmud was known as the Hunchback due to his physical appearance, but his diplomatic skills were absolutely straight as an arrow. He was a skilled negotiator who understood when to fight and when to seek peace. On the Habsburg side, we have an equally intriguing story. While Maria Theresa had not yet ascended to the throne during the war, her father, Emperor Charles VI, was desperately trying to secure her future inheritance through what was known as the Pragmatic Sanction. Think about this. In an age when female rulers were rare, Charles was moving heaven and earth to ensure his daughter could inherit the throne. The Habsburg Monarchy was fighting this war while simultaneously trying to gain European acceptance for Maria Theresa's future rule. It's quite remarkable when you think about it. While armies clashed on battlefields, diplomats were quietly working to change centuries of tradition regarding succession laws. Here's something most people don't know. Maria Theresa, though not yet empress, was already being groomed for leadership during the war. She attended state council meetings and was learning the art of governance, all while the conflict with the Ottomans raged on. The war's outcome would directly impact the empire she would eventually inherit. But who really won the Peace of Belgrade? On paper, the Ottomans seemed to have the upper hand, regaining Belgrade and other territories. The Habsburgs managed to preserve some of their holdings, but had to accept significant losses. However, the true victory might have been more subtle. Both empires avoided complete exhaustion of their resources, which would prove crucial in the years to come. Perhaps the most ironic twist is that these two leaders, Mahmud I and the future Empress Maria Theresa, never actually met in person. Yet their decisions, their ambitions, and their fears shaped the lives of millions. The Peace of Belgrade wasn't just about territory or power, it was about two empires learning to coexist, even if temporarily, in a rapidly changing world. The treaty would have lasting implications for both rulers. For Mahmud, it cemented his reputation as a capable leader who could balance military might with diplomatic finesse. For the Habsburg dynasty, it marked one of their last major agreements before Maria Theresa would face the greatest challenge of her life, defending her right to rule in the War of Austrian Succession. But that's another fascinating story for another time. Picture yourself in Belgrade on September 18, 1739. The city, still bearing the scars of recent battles, becomes the stage for one of the most significant peace treaties of the 18th century. After months of intense negotiations, quill finally meets parchment, and history takes a remarkable turn. The Treaty of Belgrade was far more than just a piece of paper. It represented a delicate balance of power that would reshape southeastern Europe. The Ottomans regained Belgrade, a jewel among their European possessions, along with parts of Serbia and Wallachia. You might wonder why the Habsburgs would agree to such terms. Well, here's the fascinating part. They managed to keep critical portions of their territory, including parts of northern Bosnia and regions along the Danube River. This was actually a clever diplomatic move. They lost some battles, but avoided losing the war entirely. But let me tell you about the most extraordinary outcome of this treaty, something that often gets overlooked in history books. Hidden within the diplomatic language and territorial exchanges was a groundbreaking declaration. The recognition of Circassia, particularly the region of Kabardia, as an independent nation. This was absolutely unprecedented. For the first time in history, European powers formally acknowledged a Caucasian nation's independence. Think about this for a moment. While great empires were redrawing their borders, a proud mountain people gained international recognition. The Circassians, known for their fierce warriors and unique culture, had lived in the Caucasus Mountains for centuries. Their homeland, stretching between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea, had long been a crossroads of civilizations. Here's something remarkable that few people know. The Circassians had developed such a sophisticated code of ethics and behavior, called adige kabze, that it influenced noble classes across Europe and the Middle East. Their reputation for producing skilled warriors and beautiful women had made them legendary throughout the medieval world. Did you know that this historical moment of independence was tragically brief? While the Treaty of Belgrade gave Circassia its moment in the sun, the great powers surrounding it would continue their territorial ambitions. This makes the treaty even more significant. It captures a unique moment when the impossible became possible, even if just for a short time. And here's an interesting backstory. The recognition of Circassia wasn't just a random diplomatic gesture. It served as a buffer zone between the Ottoman and Russian empires, both of which had their eyes on the Caucasus region. In a way, Circassian independence was a diplomatic masterpiece that helped maintain peace between larger powers. What fascinates me most about this story is how it shows that history isn't just about the big empires. Sometimes in the midst of grand political theaters, smaller nations can emerge and claim their place in the world. The Treaty of Belgrade stands as a testament to this possibility. Did you know about Circassia's recognition as an independent nation in the Treaty of Belgrade? If you're enjoying this journey through history, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles for more incredible stories like this one. And I'm curious, had you ever heard of Circassia before? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep this fascinating historical discussion going. Nestled in the majestic Caucasus Mountains, Circassia was far more than just a spot on a map. Imagine a land where snow-capped peaks meet lush valleys, where ancient traditions blend with strategic importance, and where a proud people maintained their unique identity despite being surrounded by mighty empires. Let me paint you a picture of why Circassia was so extraordinary. This wasn't just any territory, it was a natural fortress, with mountains serving as walls and valleys as corridors. The Circassians, known as the Adigi people in their own language, had developed incredible agricultural techniques to thrive in this challenging landscape. They grew crops on terraced mountainsides and raised prized horses that were sought after throughout Europe and Asia. Here's something fascinating. Circassian warriors were so renowned for their combat skills that they became the personal guards of Egyptian sultans and Ottoman rulers. The Mamluks, who ruled Egypt for centuries, were largely of Circassian origin. Their military expertise was so respected that European armies studied their techniques, particularly their mastery of light cavalry tactics. But Circassia's importance went far beyond military prowess. The region sat at a crucial crossroads between Europe and Asia. Its ports along the Black Sea were vital trading points, where goods from the Silk Road would meet European merchants. The forests of Circassia produced valuable timber used in shipbuilding, and its mountains held deposits of precious metals and minerals. The recognition of Circassian independence through the Treaty of Belgrade was a double-edged sword. While it gave them international legitimacy, it also placed them at the center of a dangerous game of empire. Kabardia, the eastern region of Circassia, became particularly important. Think of it as the crown jewel. Whoever controlled Kabardia had a strategic advantage in the entire Caucasus region. Here's a lesser-known fact. Circassian society was incredibly progressive for its time. Women held significant power and could own property, lead households, and even participate in military training. Their social code, the Adige Kabzi, was so sophisticated that it influenced noble etiquette across Europe and the Middle East. But being recognized as independent didn't make survival any easier. The Ottoman Empire viewed Circassia as a crucial buffer against Russian expansion. The Persian Empire saw it as a gateway to the Black Sea, and Russia saw it as an obstacle to their southern ambitions. Imagine being a small nation caught between three massive empires, each wanting to control your homeland. The Circassians developed an ingenious way of dealing with these pressures. They practiced what we might call today strategic diplomacy. Different Circassian princes would maintain relationships with different powers, creating a complex web of alliances that helped maintain their independence. It was like playing chess with three opponents simultaneously. One of the most intriguing aspects of Circassian culture was their education system. Young nobles would be sent to live with different families, creating networks of loyalty and ensuring that their society remained unified despite its tribal structure. This practice, called atalik, created bonds stronger than blood and helped maintain their independence. The story of Circassian independence is a testament to human resilience and adaptability. Here was a nation that managed to preserve its unique identity and independence, even while surrounded by some of the most powerful empires in history. They did this not just through military might, but through diplomatic skill, cultural strength, and an unwavering sense of who they were as a people. Their recognition in the Treaty of Belgrade wasn't just a diplomatic footnote, it was acknowledgement of a remarkable people who had managed to carve out their own place in a world dominated by empires. The Circassians showed that sometimes the greatest power lies not in the size of your army or the extent of your territory, but in the strength of your culture and the wisdom of your traditions. The consequences of the Treaty of Belgrade rippled through history like waves on a pond, touching distant shores in ways that would reshape the political landscape for centuries to come. Let me take you through this fascinating chain of events that followed this momentous agreement. For the Habsburg Monarchy, the treaty was a bitter pill to swallow, but one that carried important lessons. Imagine you're in the imperial court in Vienna, where the mood is somber yet contemplative. The loss of Belgrade, that jewel of the Danube, forced the Habsburgs to completely rethink their approach to foreign policy. Here's something interesting. This setback actually led to one of the most dramatic diplomatic reversals in European history. The Habsburgs would later form an alliance with their ancient enemies, the French, in what became known as the Diplomatic Revolution of 1756. Talk about learning from your mistakes. The Ottoman Empire, on the other hand, was riding high on success. By regaining Belgrade and securing their position in the Balkans, they experienced what we might call their last great territorial triumph in Europe. But here's the ironic twist. This victory may have given them a false sense of security. The Ottomans began to rely more on diplomatic solutions rather than military might, not realizing that their European rivals were rapidly modernizing their armies and economies. Did you know that after the treaty, the Ottomans introduced a fascinating new tradition? They began celebrating their diplomatic victories with elaborate festivals called peace celebrations, which included poetry readings, musical performances, and feasts that lasted for days. These celebrations showed how the empire was shifting from a purely military power to one that also valued diplomatic achievements. For Circassia, the treaty's aftermath tells a particularly poignant story. Their recognition as an independent nation was like a beautiful but brief sunrise. While the treaty gave them international legitimacy, it also placed them in an increasingly precarious position. Think of it as being given a magnificent crown, only to find yourself standing between three giants who each want to take it from you. Here's a lesser-known fact. During this brief period of independence, Circassian diplomatic missions began appearing in European courts. Their representatives, known for their elegant manners and sophisticated diplomacy, became quite the sensation in places like Paris and Vienna. Circassian fashion, even became trendy among European nobility. The treaty also marked the beginning of a new chapter in relations between Europe and what we now call the Middle East. It established a framework for diplomatic interaction that moved beyond the simple narrative of Christian versus Muslim powers. Trading relationships flourished, cultural exchanges increased, and we see the first real examples of European powers treating the Ottoman Empire as an equal diplomatic partner rather than just an enemy at the gates. But perhaps the most lasting impact was something nobody could have predicted at the time. The treaty created a template for how great powers could negotiate and maintain peace, even while competing for influence. It showed that diplomatic solutions could work where military might had failed. This lesson would be remembered and referenced in peace negotiations for generations to come. Here's a fascinating detail. The actual document of the Treaty of Belgrade was written in 3 languages: Latin, Ottoman Turkish, and Italian. This multilingual approach to diplomacy became a model for future international treaties, reflecting a new era of sophisticated diplomatic relations. The aftermath of the treaty also saw an unprecedented exchange of diplomatic gifts and cultural artifacts. The Habsburgs sent elaborate clockwork mechanisms to Constantinople, while the Ottomans responded with precious textiles and spices. These exchanges did more than just symbolize peace. They created networks of trade and cultural understanding that would last for decades. In the end, the Treaty of Belgrade proved that sometimes the most important victories aren't won on the battlefield, but at the negotiating table. It showed that peace, even if imperfect, could create opportunities for growth and change that war never could. The world that emerged from this treaty was more complex, more interconnected, and perhaps a little bit wiser about the true cost of conflict and the real value of peace. The legacy of the Treaty of Belgrade echoes through the centuries, leaving footprints that we can still trace today. When we look back at this remarkable diplomatic achievement, we're not just examining an old piece of parchment. We're unveiling a story that helped shape the modern world. Let me share something fascinating. The very room where the treaty was signed still exists in Belgrade's fortress. Imagine standing in that space today, where nearly 300 years ago, diplomats from great empires gathered to reshape the map of Europe and Asia. The ink from their quills may have dried long ago, but the consequences of their decisions continue to flow through time like the waters of the Danube below that ancient fortress. The treaty's influence on international diplomacy was revolutionary. Here's a detail that often gets overlooked. It was one of the first major diplomatic agreements to include cultural and commercial provisions alongside territorial settlements. Think of it as a 1739 version of a modern, comprehensive peace deal. It set a precedent for how nations could resolve their differences through negotiation rather than just warfare. But was the treaty fair to everyone involved? That's a question that still sparks heated debates among historians. For the Ottoman Empire, it represented a diplomatic triumph that would prove to be their last major victory in Europe. The Habsburgs, while losing Belgrade, managed to preserve enough of their interests to remain a major power. Yet it's the story of Circassia that perhaps best illustrates the treaty's complex legacy. Here's an intriguing historical irony. The very recognition of Circassian independence, while groundbreaking, may have ultimately contributed to its downfall. By formally acknowledging Circassia as a nation, the treaty also made it a more tempting target for ambitious empires. It's like putting a spotlight on a precious jewel. It makes it more visible, but also more vulnerable. The treaty's influence on later historical events is remarkable. Did you know that many of the borders it established formed the basis for modern national boundaries in southeastern Europe? Some of the diplomatic principles it introduced were even referenced during the Congress of Vienna in 1815, nearly a century later. One of the most fascinating aspects of the treaty's legacy is how it changed the way empires saw themselves. the Ottomans began to realize they needed to modernize to compete with European powers. The Habsburgs learned valuable lessons about the limits of military power. These realizations would shape their policies for generations to come. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Treaty of Belgrade is what it teaches us about peace and power. It shows us that even the mightiest empires sometimes need to compromise, that diplomatic solutions can be more lasting than military victories, and that small nations can, albeit briefly, find their moment in the sun. Here's something to ponder. The treaty created a diplomatic framework that influenced international relations for centuries. The way it balanced power, recognized new states, and established trade relationships became a model for future peace treaties. Even today, diplomats study the Treaty of Belgrade to understand how complex international disputes can be resolved. The treaty also left us with some remarkable cultural legacies. The peace celebrations that followed its signing inspired art, music, and literature across Europe and the Ottoman Empire. Some of these cultural exchanges continued long after the political arrangements had changed. Turkish coffee became popular in Vienna, while Western-style military bands began appearing in Constantinople. Looking at the Treaty of Belgrade today, we might see it as a mirror reflecting our own world's challenges. How do nations balance power and peace? How can smaller states maintain their independence among larger powers? These questions, first addressed in 1739, still resonate in our modern world. The legacy of the Treaty of Belgrade reminds us that history isn't just about winners and losers. It's about the complex web of consequences that flow from momentous decisions. It shows us that sometimes the most significant victories aren't won through force of arms, but through the careful art of diplomacy and the wisdom to know when to make peace. As our journey through the remarkable story of the Treaty of Belgrade comes to an end, let's take a moment to reflect on what this pivotal moment in history truly means. This wasn't just a simple peace agreement signed on a warm September day in 1739. It was a watershed moment that transformed the political landscape of Europe and Asia, redrew boundaries that had stood for centuries, and gave birth to new hopes and dreams for entire nations. Think about it. In one single document, we see the destinies of mighty empires and proud nations intertwined. The Ottoman Empire securing its position in the Balkans, the Habsburg Monarchy learning valuable lessons about the limits of power, and Circassia gaining its moment of recognition on the world stage. Each signature on that treaty represented thousands of lives, countless stories and dreams, both realized and shattered. The peace that followed might not have lasted forever. Few things in history do, but it taught us invaluable lessons about diplomacy, power, and the delicate art of international relations. The leaders of that time, whether they knew it or not, were setting precedents that would influence diplomatic relations for centuries to come. Here's a thought to ponder. Every time modern diplomats sit down to negotiate peace, they're following in the footsteps of those who gathered in Belgrade nearly 3 centuries ago. Every time nations seek to resolve their differences through dialogue rather than conflict, they're building upon the foundation laid by this historic treaty. But perhaps the most important lesson we can learn from the Treaty of Belgrade is that history isn't just about the past. It's a mirror reflecting our present and a window into our future. The challenges faced by those 18th century diplomats aren't so different from the ones we face today. How to balance power with peace, how to protect the interests of smaller nations, and how to build lasting stability in a world of competing interests. As we close this chapter of history, we're left with questions that echo through time. Was the peace truly fair to all parties involved? Could things have been done differently? And what can we learn from both the successes and failures of this historic agreement? These questions remind us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a living, breathing story that continues to teach and inspire. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most fascinating diplomatic moments, don't forget to like this video and share it with fellow history enthusiasts. Subscribe to Modern Age Chronicles for more incredible stories from the past that help us understand our present and shape our future. Hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss our next historical adventure. And here's a special invitation. Join our growing community of history lovers in the comment section below. Share your thoughts about the Treaty of Belgrade, or tell us what historical topics you'd like us to explore next. Your engagement helps us create better content and builds a community of people passionate about learning from the past. Remember, every like, share and subscription helps us bring more fascinating historical stories to light. Thank you for joining me on this journey through time, and I'll see you in our next historical adventure on Modern Age Chronicles.